I remember when I first saw Return of the Jedi in theaters in 1983. It was about 6 years before I was born. Me and David Hasselhoff were running away from the Stasi in East Berlin and working with underground resistance movements to bring down the wall. A few years later, the Hoff would single-handedly destroy the Soviet Union and kill the ghost of Stalin with the power of love in German pop music, opening up a gigantic new market for the Baywatch TV series. Anyway, I remember watching Return of the Jedi and seeing Luke appear at Jabba's castle. Despite getting completely embarrassed and losing his hand the last time we'd seen him, Luke was far more composed now, and he was wearing a mysterious hood and behaving more like Obi-Wan Kenobi than his moisture farmer self. You could say that he finally had become the Jedi that everyone knew he would be capable of becoming. But when he takes that robe off, he's not wearing the traditional robes that Obi-Wan Kenobi wore on Tatooine. He's not in the traditional white and brown robes that we see most of the Jedi wear during the Great Republic era. Instead, he's in all black. Now, at the time, I didn't really think much of it. Maybe Luke was just wearing this as a disguise to get into Jabba's, palace. I mean, this was Luke Skywalker's story. It was his hero's journey. There's no way the black combat suit was like foreshadowing his fall to the dark side or something. But then came that scene when Luke meets with Darth Vader on the forest moon of Endor. Suddenly, the black suit that Skywalker was wearing made him look eerily similar to Vader. It was almost as if the director wanted us to believe that Luke was going to give in, that he would join the dark side and become the very thing he was supposed to fight. And from a production standpoint, it makes a lot of sense for them to do this. It makes the audience uncertain of which direction that young Luke will take. Darth Vader is his father after all, and it wouldn't be the dumbest thing for Luke to join him. I mean, we could label Vader's amputation of Luke's hand as an example of domestic violence. Or we can see it from a different point of view. We can see a well-meaning father trying to impart an important lesson to his son that the world is a chaotic place and that sometimes losing a limb can make you stronger, or something toxic like that. Now later on, Luke and Vader duel again on the second Death Star. Luke is wearing that black combat suit and he's about to strike his father down. The blackness of the suit that Luke is wearing becomes more and more fitting. But as we all know, I guess spoiler alert, Luke never joins the dark side. As a matter of fact, not only does he not fall, his brave actions cause Darth Vader to come back to the light and save everyone. And so no, the black suit that Luke Skywalker is wearing is not a sign of him falling to the dark side. That is just a distraction. I mean, years after the Galactic Civil War ends, Luke is still wearing that black suit when he trains Gogurt. And so the black suit doesn't indicate that Luke, like so many others before him, will be tempted by the Sith. As a matter of fact, Luke, unlike Anakin, was always born pure. He was naturally aligned to the light side of the Force, and there was never a question about whether he'd go to the dark side, at least in my opinion. He's one of those special characters with a special personality. Raised in a humble but loving house, he never had the emotional imbalance of Anakin, the arrogance of Dooku, or the tiny T-Rex hands of Coleman Trevor. This black suit doesn't represent the struggle between dark side and light side, but what it does represent is even more important and perhaps the most important theme in all of Star Wars. Yes, of course, the battle between good and evil is eternal. The Jedi Sith are a part of the core struggle that is Star Wars. But that's just one small part of the mythology that George Lucas attempted to create by starting the Star Wars galaxy. George Lucas didn't just study film growing up, he also studied anthropology, or the study of how societies function and how humans behave in groups. And so he's always been a keen observer of the history of man. This is why the worlds in his film feel so rich and full of life and detail and culture. And like many individuals who study anthropology, George Lucas uncovered a, pretty important truth about humanity.
That the conclusion I've come to is that all the religions are true. They just see a different part of the elephant. A religion is basically a container for faith. Faith is the glue that holds us together as a society.
Religion, tradition, culture, these are what I like to call social technology. Lessons based on human learning and experiences that are passed down from generation to generation. These things don't have the accuracy of modern science, obviously, but many of these ideas have withstood the test of time and are the products of generational wisdom, which should not be scoffed at. These things are just as priceless. Of course, in the modern world, we've come to realize that a lot of the religions and traditional ways have kind of lost their way. Like many belief systems, they've become stagnant and no longer are relevant to the times we live in. We have a much better understanding and a more empathetic view of humanity and the situation we're all in. In our own world, the smartest amongst us, intellectuals like Richard Dawkins and the late Christopher Hitchens, tore apart these ancient beliefs and traditions with the cold serrated blade that is rational thinking. But these brilliant men who can sustain themselves purely on their passion to learn and grow have often misunderstood what the masses really want and think. The reality is, for most of us, the idea of atheism, the uncertainty that it brings to our life spiritually, can be terrifying. Many of us don't have the courage or the intellectual stamina to try and understand how we fit into this chaotic existence. We yearn for understanding, for the meaning of life, in the same way that primitive apes try to understand the terrifying flashes of lightning they see or the heat of the fires that engulf forests. It's hard for most of us to accept that most things in our world are uncertain and very hard to explain. And that our civilization here on Earth is kept running not by large, perfect government structures or rules and regulations, but by imperfect humans who every day have to decide between doing what's right or what's easy. George Lucas saw all of this and realized that faith was necessary for societies to work. We can't all be experts in everything. And while it's important to be independent and also do our own research, we simply can't do that for every issue. Sometimes we just need to have some trust, some faith. But the problem with most versions of faith in today's world, whether it's faith in tradition or religion, is that the number one factor in determining your faith is who your parents are and where you were born. If you were born somewhere in the Midwest in America, you're very likely to be born a Christian. If you were born somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, you're very likely to be born a Muslim. If you were born with Force sensitivity, you were most likely snatched from your crib by a Jedi. And the thing is, although these individual cultures and religions are important and mostly beneficial to the individuals who adhere to them, these cultures and religions are by nature hostile to opposing cultures and religions. In order to preserve their belief, they cannot allow their adherents to dabble in different beliefs. The reality is, most Abrahamic religions, most Eastern religions, spiritual beliefs, they all share a very similar set of beliefs and values. They're not really that different, even though the leaders of these organizations will say that you have been chosen, you are special, you are an individual who is better than those who have not adopted this faith. This, of course, is nonsense. This is just an attempt by leaders in these organizations to preserve their own power, because faith gives them so much power to dictate the course of action these people's lives should take. And so conflicts between belief systems naturally emerge because of this dynamic, and that is not something George Lucas wants. It's not to say that George Lucas wasn't religious or spiritual in his own way. He's a self-claimed Buddhist Methodist, which is one of these more New Age religions where you focus more on just morality and love rather than like specific tenets, like pray at this time, eat this kind of food, do this with your women and all that kind of stuff. It's more about the basic form of morality that most religions are tied to. And by the way, guys, I don't mean to offend anyone, whether you're religious or not. I believe the world is a wonderful place, and I support everyone who's on their own personal journey to find themselves. We all need different things in life, and what I need isn't necessarily what you need, and I think it's okay to be religious or be atheist as long as those beliefs don't hurt others or suppress others. And so anyway, Star Wars has always been this platform to create a mythology that pushes forward the thoughts and beliefs of George Lucas. The struggle between good and evil, as we mentioned, is a part of this mythology, as is the fight between democracy and authoritarianism, which becomes a center focus of the prequels. But this mythology, it's really created for one single purpose, and it's targeted to, I think, the most important audience for Star Wars.
It's hard for people to realize, and I'm not supposed to say this, and I wasn't supposed to say it then, but it's a film for 12-year-olds.
Yes, George Lucas said it. Star Wars is for 12-year-olds. So the next time you comment in a YouTube video or on some forum, remember, criticism is great. Constructive criticism is even better. And yes, the sequels objectively were not so good, but we can eliminate the hatred, the bullying aspect that I see a lot out there, because we have to remember, you're a grown person, and potentially on the other side of the computer is a 12-year-old, which is kind of weird, right? For an old person to just yell at a younger person for liking a piece of media that's clearly created for children. George Lucas understands that adults, we're mostly set in our ways. And for most of us, the older we get, the less we change, the more fearful and scared we become of new things. We start screaming at young kids because we don't understand the new trends, the new technology, the way of thinking. We forget that at one time we were children too, and our own parents screamed at us for the same exact reasons. It's kind of sad. But George Lucas is wise enough to see that children still have a chance, and by investing our time in children, by nurturing them, we can have the most positive effect on the future. And in this day and age where, parents are, more and more anxious than ever and pushing their own anxieties and fears on their children and, making it even harder for them to grow up and go out and see the world and be courageous, I think such a mythology of going out there and being brave is extremely important in today's age.
You're about to enter the real world. You're 12 years old. You're going to go on into the big world. You're moving away from your parents being the center focus.
Now, Lucas says 12-year-olds because I think he's thinking about, all those children who are about to enter high school, who are starting to develop some autonomy in their own lives. But this story, this mythology, can also apply to 18-year-olds who are about to become adults, or in this day and age where there are limited economic opportunities and a changing, cultural landscape for people well into their 20s and 30s. I personally believe you don't become an adult until you actually take responsibility for someone beside yourself, whether it's like a girlfriend or a child or a dog or a house plant. I don't know. I've met some people who are like 50 years old and they've never had any of those things, and I still consider them children. So it's not really about the age, it's about the amount of responsibility we're willing to take on ourselves. It's about being selfless. And so when we reframe Star Wars in this way, especially the original trilogy, the main theme is the hero's journey, but also the journey from childhood, Luke's boring but safe life on Tatooine, to his eventual adulthood, when Luke takes responsibility not only for himself, but for his friends, and as one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, he also takes responsibility for the future of the galaxy, in the colossal fight between light and dark, democracy and authoritarianism. It's a lot. It's a lot of responsibility. Luke starts off the journey in his loose-fitting white and beige robes. He's disheveled, and the white symbolizes his innocence and the lack of imprinting the world has done to him. Young Luke likes complaining about not having enough time to hang out with his friends.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
He doesn't appreciate the peace and calm on his homestead, the 3 square meals, and the crazy lengths his uncle, aunt, and Obi-Wan Kenobi go to keep him safe from crazy people. All Luke wants is adventure. All he wants is his own chance to go out and see the galaxy and face danger and excitement.
This year we'll make enough on the harvest that I'll be able to hire some more hands, and then you can go to the academy next year. You must understand I need you here, Luke. But it's a whole nother year.
It's actually Luke's exuberance and optimism that allows him to bounce back from terrible trauma, like seeing his uncle and aunt being roasted alive by stormtroopers. I mean, he feels sad, but that sadness, those tears he sheds, are immediately wiped away by this exciting chance to ride in a starship and finally journey to another planet. It's the same journey that almost every Star Wars hero, from Rey to Omega to Andor, experiences. It's that moment when the stars around you begin to streak into beams of light as your starship enters hyperspace, and the only thing ahead of you is endless opportunity. It's that same youthful exuberance that allows Luke to trust a voice in his head to go to Dagobah and meet Yoda.
You will go to the Dagobah system.
I mean, how many of you out there today would follow that voice? And I'm not talking about a voice in your head, but just the voice of some individual you had just met a few days earlier. I mean, how many of us are so cynical and pessimistic because of the terrible experiences either we viewed in social media or experienced ourselves? How many of you would have missed out on your Dagobah? If Luke had been an older person, a man, I'm pretty sure he would have missed out on that opportunity. At the same time, it's that impulsiveness and lack of wisdom that leads to Luke not heeding the wisdom of Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who don't want him to go and rescue his friends and encounter Vader on Bespin. Luke is so full of youthful confidence he goes anyway, and his friends escape without his help, and he ends up dueling his own father, something he wasn't mentally or physically prepared for, and he loses his arm as a result. It's at this point Luke dons that black combat suit. No, he's not mourning the loss of his arm. It's at this point he realizes that he can in fact be hurt. You know, that trench run on Yavin 4 and all that plot armor that protected him definitely skewed his view on his own mortality a bit. But losing your hand tends to change your view on the world. And so Luke chooses black for the same reason why everyone in New York dresses in black. For the same reason that people in offices wear black suits, and for the same reason that grooms wear tuxedos, and that the Grim Reaper has those robes, and that priests, rabbis, imams, and King T'Challa all wear black. It's a sign of seriousness. It's a sign of maturity. It's a signal to your fellow man that you are someone who can be trusted, who is responsible. Luke realized that he wasn't just some moisture farmer from Tatooine. He was a war hero, one of the few remaining Jedi in the galaxy. He was a symbol of hope for so many people and someone that everyone looked up to. He could no longer live out his selfish desires. He was no longer a boy who could just do anything he wanted to. Plus, black is extremely slimming. It's sexy. These are the reasons why Luke wore black after his dual investment.